Thank you, guys. Okay. So, before we started, let's get some sense of the room. How many of you guys have ever worked with Azure, Microsoft cloud provider? Ooh, a lot of hands. Okay. How many of you work with Entra ID? Ooh, a lot of. And how many of you configure application in Entra ID, work with groups, users, and all the IT and security configuration? Oh, really technical audience. Awesome. OK, so my name is Jonathan, and today we're going to talk about a tool I co-authored with Tomer that's called EntraGoat. Me and Tomer both work at Paris, a cybersecurity company specialized in Active Directory and Entra ID. So we're going to talk about a few things today. First thing first, the background story on why we created the tool. Secondly, we're going to talk about the very big title, identity is the new parameter kind of things. We're going to delve deep into the whole situation with Entra ID and the problems it currently have. And then we're going to show you what EntraGoat is all about. And we're going to deep dive into all the scenarios. By the way, spoiler alerts. OK, so the Goat projects are basically a family of deliberately vulnerable environments that push code into certain environment. That can be CI/CD Goat, AWS Goat, Azure Goat. But the reason we developed EntraGoat itself is because first thing first, it didn't have any Goat project for Entra ID especially. And we love CTFs, and we wanted to draw more attention to Entra ID and bring new audience to the field. And by the way, I think that capture the flag challenges are one of the best ideas to learn new things because you actually have to perform hands-on actions on the field that you're learning. So let's get started with the theoretical background. The identity is the new parameter kind of thing is very popular in the last couple of years, maybe even 3 years, because if you get a valid credentials, you don't need any sophisticated exploit in order to bypass the defense because you have credentials. And I asked Opus 4 by Sonnet to give me all the resources that use this kind of phrase, and it gave me a lot. But you see the title. It's broken because if you have credentials, you can bypass a lot of defenses. For example, this morning, I went to the darknet forums and searched where can I get credentials or identities, basically. And there is a lot of forums that's selling credentials, whether it's for Spotify credential or from a more mature site, let's call it like that, or VPN. You can buy them for basically a few cents. If you buy a bulk of credentials, let's say 100K users, you pay very, very little to that. OK. So it's not true anymore, because in my opinion, it's not identity is the new parameter now. It's non-human identities are the new parameter, and they're broken. And let me read you out loud a few sentences out of the report that Microsoft published in the last year. And it states, today, there are one human identity for every 10 workload identities. This problem is even more acute among small and medium-sized businesses, which have one human identity for every 50 workload identities. And they use the term workload identities to signify that it's not a human identity behind the scenes. It's some kind of a service behind the scenes. So there are 50-to-1 ratio between human and non-human identities. And more of that, out of the 209 million cloud identities identified in 2023, 50% plus were identified as super identities. So you might say, OK, it's just 50%. It's not that a lot. And in addition, what can a super identity can even do? Well, according to their report, A super identity is a user or a workload identity that has access to all permissions and all resources across your entire cloud estate. In my opinion, it should not be called super identity, but rather super duper ultra mega pro identities, because again, all permission and all resources in your cloud estate accessible to those accounts. And for every 3 human super identities, there are 7 workloads identities. And they also mention a bit more data that only 2% to 3% of the overall assigned permission are being used. So we have a ton of super identities, and we assign too much permission to them. And by the way, guys, this report is by Microsoft, right? They created this product. OK. And while we're talking about Microsoft, maybe showcase an attack on Entra ID on Microsoft themselves. So in the beginning of 2024, APT29, also known as Kozyber, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, performed an attack on Entra ID of Microsoft. The attack, in very, very short brief, it went like this. They password spray. And by the way, take a look on the words that they're using, because many lawyers went over this wording. So whenever you see legacy test user account, keep that in mind. OK? So this group, APT29, they password spray on a legacy test account. That legacy account has some kind of a permission over an OAuth app. And that app has a connection in Microsoft's own cooperate tenant. And by that, they were able to create another privileged account inside Microsoft's own tenant and consent to another privileged people and read their mailbox. But if we maybe take a zoom on the specific attack path that were used in this scenario, we can see the very, very straightforward attack path. A user account can manage an application that can manage a service principal inside another tenant that basically has privileges on that tenant. Okay? And in the report itself, they even mention what Mitiga themselves think that the issue was. And they said, the app role assignment read-write-all role in particular suggests the attacker could assign app role and manage permission across the tenant, a capability that would significantly amplify their access to the control over corporate resources. So I saw that report when I was creating EntraGoat, and I thought to myself, how can I recreate that exactly attack path that you're seeing in red? And I came up with 2 scenarios. And in fact, those 2 scenarios are the easiest scenarios of them all. This is the first scenario and the second scenario in the tool out of the 6. So how did we come to that place that it's so basically simple that with a few strategic steps you can compromise the whole Entra ID environment? Well, if left unchecked, the Entra ID environment can become somewhat of a complex and tangled environment, because there are requesting broad graph API requests beyond what they truly need. Privileged groups are bloated with inactive or unnecessary account, and there are far many more misconfigurations that can be taken place in Entra ID. And it makes sense, because every too big environment, after some kind of time, and some IT management people, they become redundant. Okay? And by the way, we mentioned before the report by Microsoft, and take a look at those numbers. 58% of the organizations are exposed to at least one attack path. 7% of organizations are exposed to more than 1,000 attack paths, and 351 is the average number of attack paths within an organization. Those are a huge number, if you ask me. 351 attack paths is the average? That's crazy. OK, so what EntraGoat does, basically, it reproduces the most common attack path, the most popular attack path in Entra ID in your own test tenant. That way, you can deploy the scenario and test them. Basically, attack, extract the logs, and learn how you can defend your own real tenant. And let me just emphasize two words on that presentation. Your own test tenant, OK? One of the most common questions I got while presenting this presentation is, can I run it on production environment? Believe it or not. And I always say, guys, this tool deploy vulnerable configuration to the tenant. You should not use it. And I repeat, should not use it on a production environment. Simply don't do that. OK, so we saw the problems and the misconfiguration that can happen in Microsoft Entra ID. Let's delve down a bit more about what EntraGoat truly is. So EntraGoat is an open source, deliberately vulnerable Entra ID environment designed to simulate real-world misconfiguration and attack path in a hands-on CTF-style lab. This is how it looks like. Pretty much a React app that runs on the web locally on the machine. And you can see that each scenario, it comes with a few hints on how to solve it. And basically, it's a learning lab, but with a CTF twist. Because, as I said earlier, I truly believe that the whole gamify experience of the learning is very important, OK? Because it's more engaging. So EntraGoat is a hands-on learning platform first, and then a CTF-style challenges. And in order to support that integration purposes, we built it to be beginner-friendly. So even if you never worked with Entra ID before, you still can spawn it up and learn by following the solution steps in each one of them. OK, so each challenge, and there are 6 challenges. Each challenges come with a unique attack path, nudges, which is basically a step-by-step hints, setup and cleanup scripts, because we do want to push and deploy the vulnerable configuration into the tenant, but we also want to clean it afterwards. We don't want to leave anything behind. And in addition to that, it comes with a full solution workflow file, basically all the commands you have to run in order to execute the attack path. Okay? And in addition to that, we also published a blog post on each of the scenarios in my company blog post that covers all the theoretical background behind each attack. So why the attack is even being possible to run. And another very popular question that we get when presenting this the EntraGoat is, how much does it cost? Because I have to spawn some resources in the cloud, right? So the answer is very simple. It costs nothing, because Microsoft charges you on resources, not on identities. So whenever you spawn even thousands of identities in the cloud, it costs you around nothing. And believe me, when testing the EntraGoat tool, I run, I think, like thousands times all the scenarios. It cost me nothing. OK, how much are we in time? Awesome. So let's go over the scenarios, and let me explain to you why we created each one of them and how you can attack each one of them. So the first scenario is all about service principal ownership. As I mentioned earlier, there's plenty of workload identities, non-human identities being deployed in Entra, and they're privileged. So this scenario, the first scenario, covers exactly that. Because application ownership is a legitimate administrative feature in Entra ID. It is designed to support decentralized administration tasks across the large organization and to enable teams to manage their own enterprise application. but it can also be attacked that way, because when applications are granted privilege roles, ownership assignment can become eligibility. Because if you're an owner of a service principal, you can manage it. You can add a credential to it, and you can authenticate using that service principal. And you know what? Maybe let me take a step back and explain why this is even possible. Because it's an application. You should not be able to log in with it to Entra ID, right? So Entra ID behind the scenes have two objects, two identities for an application. One is called application registration, which is basically the configuration, the blueprint of the application itself, all the URI are being managed there, and the grant of the scopes that is allowed to access is being granted there. But the true identity, the true security identity that is being assigned to the application is called service principal, or how Microsoft call it, enterprise application. And that object can be used to authenticate to the tenant and perform privilege actions. So in scenario number one, basically, a low privilege user is being assigned as an owner of a privileged application that has the role of privilege admin authenticator, and that role can basically reset any user password in the tenant. So whenever you're an owner of an application, you can do pretty much all the things that application can do on its own. The second scenario is, again, with service principals, and that's one mimic exactly the attack that Microsoft got compromised by. So you start with a low privilege user named Jennifer Clark, and you have a certificate at your hands. You get the certificate, and you're being said, OK, find out what service principal or what application can use the certificate and authenticate to the tenant with that and continue the attack, or start the attack. So when a valid certificate is registered for a service principal, it can be used to authenticate without interactive input or multi-factor authentication. This app-only authentication flow operate outside of user-centric protection that allow a compromised certificate to directly access Graph API with permission or role assignment to the service principal. So you basically use the certificate to authenticate as the service principal. Then you have the app role read assignment, and the app role assignment read write all permission that basically allows you to add any more permission you want to any identity you want in the tenant, and you assign yourself a more privileged permission, which is called role management read write all directory. That permissions allow you to grant any role you want in the tenant. So there are permissions that can be assigned to application, and there are roles that can be assigned to identities inside the tenant. So whenever you get the role management read-write directory permission, you're able to assign any roles you want to any identity you want. So you use it in order to assign yourself a privileged roles, and basically the global administrator role, and then you can reset the password of the global administrator user. Scenario number 3 is all about groups, okay? And there's very interesting, features that require groups in Entra ID. So just like now, scenario number 1, and by the way, you can see the similarities between scenario number 1 and scenario number 3. We did this intentionally, that each scenario builds on top of the previous scenario. So even if you're a complete beginner, you'll be able to solve them one by one and to understand and to build your knowledge in order to understand it further. So scenario number 3 demonstrates how legitimate Entra ID low privilege users have a group ownership over a privilege role, which has the role application administrator role. That group and that role is very, very privileged, since it allows you to basically add a client secret, just like you did in scenario number 1, to any application inside the tenant. So the attack path looks as follows. If you're an owner of a group, you can manage their membership, right? So you can add yourself as a member to that group, and then inherit the role that it has. the moment you inherit the application administrator role, you can add secret to any service principals and application inside the tenant. That way, you can, just like in scenario number 1, authenticate as that user and as that application and inherit the role that it has. And in that case, you find the application is also a member of a privileged role, a group of a privileged role, and then you can set the password of a global administrator. Scenario number 4 is very similar to scenario number 3, but it just add one more extra step, which is PIM. So Entra Privilege Identity Management enables just-in-time access to a directory, roles and resources, instead of permanent assignment. So instead of you having always being assigned an activated role, you can just assign a reduced time of the role. So you have to activate it yourself in order to make it accessible. But again, it is the same attack path in scenario number 3, but just with extra step. So first thing you have to activate, you have to enumerate and to find that you have that PIM assignment. Then you have to activate it, and then just like in scenario number 3, you have to take advantage of the application administrative role and to export the scenario. So scenario number 1, 2, and 3 are beginner-friendly. Scenario number 4 is a bit more advanced, but scenario number 5 and 6 are much more advanced. So this is scenario number 5, and we did see that in our customer environment, in which you're not assigned a group with strong permission over the whole directory, but rather you are assigned a group with a strong permission over a specific administrative unit. That means only a few users with that in that access can be able to basically perform the permission you have. So the Sarah Connor user is an eligible owner of a group. We already saw what you can do with a group ownership in scenario number 3, but it's very restricted to a specific AU inside Entra ID. But in addition to that, she's also an eligible member in HR support team, which has the user profile administrative role. And by the way, this role is not built-in role, it's a custom role. So that role, what is it enable you is enable you to edit any user property you want inside the tenant. So you can use it in order to edit administrator properties, and that way it will cause them to be being added to the AU that you're controlling, because the AU have a built-in rule that says whenever a user department is equal to HR, add him to that specific AU. So by combining those two attack paths, you can reset the global administrator user. Okay, scenario number 6 is much more complex, and it shows that a service principal can be an owner of another service principal. So if in the first scenario we saw that a user can be an owner of a privileged service principal, in this scenario you have to do that basically twice, because you get a secret access to a legacy automation service, and that service principal is an owner of another service principal. And by the way, fun fact, you can't assign via the UI service principal ownership over another service principal. You have to do it via an API. But the attack path is somewhat complex to explain in a short amount of time. But basically, this service principal, the data sync production service principal, it has the permission of organization read write all, which allow you to upload any certificate authority you want to the tenant. So you have to basically create your own service certificate authority using OpenSSL or any other method, and then to upload a root certificate authority to the tenant. Then you have to enable a CBA, certificate-based authentication, to the tenant in order to use that certificate, because now that you have a certificate of authority, a root certificate of authority in the tenant, you can assign, or you can sign on any certificates. So what you should do is basically enable CBA via the Apple attack path, and that way you can create a certificate for the admin account and use it in order to passwordly authenticate to the tenant and get a hold of the admin account. I think that is on my end. 5 minutes. OK, so we have a lot of time for questions, guys. Feel free to ask. Thank you.
Right, we've got 5 minutes for questions. You know the drill. Put your hand up if you have questions, and one of our folks here will come to you with a microphone. We've got one over here, one over the back there. We'll start with this gentleman over here.
Hey, are there any scenarios in EntraGoat that don't start with either user or service principal compromise as like the first step?
Sorry, what did you say?
Are there any scenarios that don't begin with user compromise or service principal compromise as a first step?
Yeah, OK, so the way we built the scenario, we do want to give you an initial access to the tenant, because the way you usually get initial access to the tenant is either by password spray, which we don't want you to do because Microsoft don't allow you to do that, even on your own infrastructure. So we skip that step because we can't basically simulate that. Okay, we can create I don't know, a vulnerable environment to password spray or to guest invite or something like that, because it has to be single tenant and it can't be used any brute force or anything like that. So each scenario starts with an initial foothold or on a low privilege user, and you make your way from that to global administrator.
Next question over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, why would a service principal be owner of another one? Is it a default scenario, or is it just very strange setup Entra?
The ownership of what? Sorry?
When one service principal was owner of another one.
Yeah. Believe it or not, it's very popular because for some kind of task, let's say automation task, you do want to assign ownership to a service principal over another service principal, even much more application, because that way you can automate task, whether it's CI/CD pipeline or anything like that. It's really useful to do that.
OK, do we have other questions? Anyone else want to put your hand up? Oh, gentleman here in the front. Anybody else? Put your hand up.
Do you have any, or are you thinking to including more, just not identities, but maybe a version that has resources? I mean, because that's also, it's a mess in the organizations with misconfigured key vaults and blob storage. That also is a step where you, I mean, like the report Microsoft now have with the Storm 0501, that's have the new cloud, the ransom in cloud in Azure. But that would be something cool also for the understanding and work. But that costs, of course, if you're adding resources, as you said. But it could be a nice version adding.
Yeah, I didn't quite got the question.
If you are planning to adding more in here, including resources, for an example, in the EntraGoat.
Yeah, so this is the initial version of EntraGoat, and there's already Azure Goat. Okay, we wanted to create a Goat project specifically for Entra ID because I know it seems familiar, but Azure and Entra ID are very different platforms with very different purposes. So Entra ID manage thousands of applications, some of them even not touching Azure, and so we wanted to keep it separated. But we do plan to add more scenarios in the future.
OK. I think presentations back to back, so I think we'll call it there. Where are you going to be after this talk?
I'm going to be over there. And by the way, I have 4 shirts to give away.
Oh.
And like 15 stickers. So if you want, come get some merch.
See, merch. Plenty of reasons to find Jonathan and ask him questions. Best questions get merch. Thank you very much, Jonathan.